Hi, everyone. And for those who don't know me, my name is Nadia and I'm on Summit's team. I just wanted to drop in before the session officially kicks off and say hi and welcome to Young World Leaders Summit. While in a normal year, we'd be gathering on the slopes of Powder Mountain or the beaches of Tulum, Mexico, as you can see, we're doing things a little bit different this year. Thank you for joining Summit's first virtual event, as it is so important for us that in spaces like this, where leaders, learners, makers with impact at the forefront of their work can convene and share resources. And to all the Summit Junto members in this meeting, thank you for your participation and support. Remember, as a Junto member, you can join us backstage after this session for an intimate Q&A conversation with the speaker. For those who want to learn more and apply to Summit Junto, our annual membership program where Summit curates your personal advisory board to help you navigate life's major challenges, head over to summit.co/junto/impact to learn more.
Hi, I'm Shira, Executive Director of Summit Impact, a nonprofit dedicated to supporting social impact leaders by creating ecosystems of innovation and resource around them. It is my pleasure to get to introduce the final keynote of our Young World Leaders Summit. We know that climate change poses a tremendous threat to humanity. Now is the time to act. And today we get to hear from some of the most incredible environmental activists. Cody Two Bears and Tokata Iron Eyes are Indigenous conservation leaders and two of our Summit fellows. They'll be joined in conversation with renowned climate activist Naomi Klein. Together, they'll discuss the starkest challenges facing our planet and the most optimistic solutions for how we can move forward. So for everyone tuning in, I invite you to settle in and enjoy this incredible conversation. Cody, I'll let you take it from here.
Hello, everyone. My name is Cody Two Bears. I'm the founder and executive director of Indigenized Energy. And I'm so excited today. It's truly an honor to be here today with two very powerful, unique women that have put themselves in the front lines of the climate activism in two very unique ways. First of all, I'd like to talk about Naomi Klein. Is an award-winning journalist, columnist, documentary filmmaker, and author of multiple New York Times and international bestsellers. Her writing has appeared in newspapers and magazines all over the world, and she is a senior correspondent for The Intercept. Tokata Iron Eyes is a member of the Standing Rock Sioux tribe and has been confronting injustice since she was 9 years old. testifying against a uranium mine in the sacred Black Hills of South Dakota. Now 16, she continues to demonstrate her commitment to speaking on behalf of Indigenous nations all over the world, from the No DAPO movement at Standing Rock to missing and murdered Indigenous women across the U.S. Let me tell you how excited I am. I'd like to thank the Summit community for allowing this discussion to happen for you all, and how so honored and privileged I am to be able to moderate and host this discussion with you all, and how much very important that climate change is in today's world. So we look at how we can benefit future generations to come and what kind of creative ideas and discussions we can have moving forward. And I'm so excited once again to be able to host this discussion with you all. First of all, let's get right into it, shall we? I mean, let's get right into the questions. I have a question. Let's start off with Tokata Iron Eyes. Tokata, first question goes to you. What can we learn from the First Nations about how to measure wealth in Indigenous communities? What does Indigenous communities mean when we talk about wealth? What does it mean to them?
Yeah, I think the key word here would be abundance. I think that the way that capitalism defines wealth, as we've learned, right, is very much violent. And for Indigenous communities, it's caused tremendous amounts of traumas, and the connection between wealth and land, right? Like now, we live in a system which views land and which views resources as something inseparable from money, which means we've sort of degraded these things in such a way that we've announced that they have a price and that they can be bought and sold and owned, right, or exploited. And it's been very, very bad. It's been extremely violent towards our planet in such a way, that right now we're raising a generation of young people who are facing a climate catastrophe and are facing a crisis which has put the safety and stability of our future and the future of this planet on the line.
Thank you for that, Tokata. Okay, the next question would be to you, Naomi. You talk a lot about the incompatibility of capitalism and sustainability. What is the best model of economic development from what you see?
Well, first of all, I'd just like to say how happy I am to be in conversation with both of you. And also, I know that your family has been through a very, very difficult loss, and that you're still grieving the loss of your father, Cody. And I just want to say all love to you and to your family, and you as well, Tokata. And thank you for being with us when the loss is still so fresh. I want to acknowledge that I'm speaking to you from unceded Indigenous lands on the coast of the Salish Sea, the lands of the Sechelt First Nation in what is called British Columbia. The waters that surround where my family lives are very much threatened by new fossil fuel infrastructure, including plans to triple the Trans Mountain Pipeline. And if we have any hope of resisting this, it's because of Indigenous land protectors and water protectors. So I want to acknowledge that as well. I don't use the word sustainability much. Because it's a funny word, and it sort of assumes an idea that the goal is to maintain the status quo, but sort of do a couple of little tweaks, right? So we get our energy from the sun instead of from the underground, and but the goal of it is, in the words of Arundhati Roy, the wonderful Indian novelist and activist, she says, when the big environmentalists ask the question of sustainability, what they're really asking is, how do we change without changing? Which I think about all the time. How do we change without changing? And the truth is that we can't change without changing. That it isn't just about flipping a switch where we get to live exactly how high consumers are already living, except maybe we compost, or we have, a so-called circular economy, so we don't have to feel guilty about the levels of consumption. It's much more profound than that, and I think relates to what Tokata was talking about earlier about really different conceptions of what is value, what is wealth. When I wrote This Changes Everything, which came out in 2014, I felt I needed, some 70 pages of endnotes to support the claim that capitalism was at war with life on this planet. And now it's sort of like, just look around you, right? You didn't need all those endnotes because we are really living a collapse of this system in a really, really dangerous stage. And so the ways in which capitalism devours the natural world is intimately connected to why we are seeing diseases like COVID-19, that these viruses that leap from animals to humans, because we are making more and more incursions into their homes, into the animals' homes, and this is one example of it that we're all living through. And the inability of the government of the United States to simply put life ahead of the so-called economy, I think, is now a very, very vivid example of the monstrous values that govern our world. So, if we think about changing, what is the next system? I feel like we sometimes talk about it as if we're talking about a software upgrade, and we can just neatly switch from one system to the other. When in fact, it really is not nearly so neat. And there is no switch on capitalism that we're going to turn off. It is going to crash out, and it is going to cause tremendous damage. And so what we need to be figuring out is how do we take care of each other? How do we build communities of care in the midst of this? How do we develop alternatives in the midst of it that are kind of ready at the other end? But I think we have to acknowledge that the first long phase of whatever comes after this is a period of repair, because so much damage is being done to the natural world and to all of the people who rely on it, and all of the beings, the non-human beings that rely on it. That the first phase is one of repair. It isn't one of just like switching from one system to the next system.
Thank you so much for that, Naomi. Very, very good answer. I truly believe everything that you just said. We'll move on to the next question. From this one to go to Tokata. What are the connections between violence against women and violence against the land? I guess, can you kind of give us some examples of that?
There's one thing that I'd like to mention, which is that, like, within Indigenous communities, right, within like our populations, we are survivors of apocalypse in a way, right? So we've survived genocide, and now we're at a stage, right, where we are living in a constant state of apocalypse because all of the tools and all of the, I guess, oppressors, the sort of pillars which held up the systems which allowed for such violence, those things have all exist now, and they exist in different ways, and they exist under different names. But we've seen that with the earth, like it's 100% representative of the way that we treat women. I mean, patriarchy in a way has been such a violent tool which has worked incredibly well within capitalism, and has been aided in many ways by capitalism. It has allowed for, I think, the dynamics of power to go haywire in a way that was very oppressive, and and the denial of simple things like agency over one's body. And if we're talking about how, Indigenous people, we identify the earth as a woman and we identify the earth as an autonomous being, because there are certain systems and she has certain rules set up, right, that if we don't follow, as we know now, the results of that and the consequences of that are not only catastrophic, but they are never in separation from us. So it's a recognized, so it's I guess, a reframing of mindset to the solution anyway, right, is a reframing of mindset and of our perspectives, so that we can start viewing not only humanity, but what makes humanity and the things which allow for humanity to survive and which have allowed, right, for a physical place for history to occur, allowing those things to be so significant, right, that that we would never question the laws and the systems of checks and balances that are already in place from these things. Like, how can it be, right, that we've allowed ourselves to exist for this long and live for this long in systems which have never, right, allowed for large amounts of our populations to live in a way that is not suffering? Right? Why are we acting like it was ever not intentional? And also, why are we acting like, right, we cannot change that?
Thank you so much for that, Tokata. Before I get into the next question, I want to have Naomi ask Tokata a question and Tokata ask Naomi a question after this question is over. So make sure you guys think of a really, really good question for each other. I know we're all family, and we gathered at Standing Rock. We had a wonderful time there, and it was just awesome memories that we all shared together. But this next question would be for Naomi. What should the role of government be in confronting the causes of climate change?
So I think that it's never just what the government is going to do. Our governments have failed in their most core duty, which is to protect the future. And the only reason why we're in a situation where we may get some bold climate policy going forward is because of incredible grassroots organizing on many, many fronts, not just in terms of mobilizing the vote, but here thinking specifically of the framework of climate justice that is behind something like a Green New Deal. Now, Biden has taken parts of that framework, not all of it, but parts of it, in terms of thinking about climate, not the way the Obama-Biden administration talked about it, which was sort of as a very narrow carbon policy, maybe creating some green jobs. And now the way Biden is talking about it is as really the jobs program for his entire government, as a new industrial policy, as a new infrastructure policy. If you read his platform, one of the 4 pillars is confronting and dismantling racial injustice. All of this is because of the work of social movements. All of this is because of the environmental justice movement, the climate justice movement, working for decades and pushing and pushing. And just because there's a politician now who's saying, who's adopted some of the movement's talking points, doesn't mean that we say, okay, well, now it's just the government's job. Movements are going to have to stay engaged at every stage. We're not going to be able to put this, leave this to the government, but at the same time, we do need to demand a few very clear things. One is ambitious targets that are guided by science. Biden has talked a lot about differentiating himself from Trump as being somebody who listens to scientists. And what scientists have told us when it comes to climate change is that we need to basically get off fossil fuels in the next decade in a wealthy country like the United States or Canada. And in the entire globe, we need to do it by mid-century. But because we come from countries that are the largest historical emitters, we need to do it even faster. So we need to have clear science-based targets. That's the first thing. And we already have this within UN frameworks that the United States was part of negotiating, even though under Trump, they bowed out for a while and Biden is saying he's going to rejoin it. The Paris Climate Accord makes a commitment to keep temperature increases below 1.5 to 2 degrees. What scientists have told us is if we are serious about this, then that requires transformation of virtually every aspect of society, which is a quote from an Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change report that came out in 2018. So we need our government to listen to the scientists like they're saying they're going to do, set clear targets, keep to those targets, allow those targets to be audited so we really keep them honest. But we don't need them to do everything. And in fact, I think it would be really dangerous. And I would love, maybe my question I'll save my question for Tokata till that time comes. But I think it would be really dangerous for climate policies to just be handed down from Washington and imposed on communities. Indigenous communities, Black and Brown communities across the nation all know that can be a recolonization process, right? So there needs to be a kind of dialectic between these clear targets that are set at the United Nations and at the national level, but an empowering of the grassroots to design what that actually looks like. But I think what we must have are clear values that are infused through any green industrial policy or Green New Deal or whatever you want to call it. I frankly don't care what you call it, as long as it has the core principles of climate justice at the center, which is that we're talking about fighting poverty and climate change at the same time, fighting racism and climate change at the same time, fighting gender exclusion and oppression and climate change at the same time. And we know how to do this. We know how to multitask. And there are many examples of that. So what we need from government is setting the targets, keeping themselves on it by auditing, listening to movements, holding them to those values, those climate justice values, as well as the scientific targets, and then really empowering communities to co-create and co-design what the policies should look like. But just to go a little bit further in terms of what we need to expect of our governments, I think we have a lot that we can learn from COVID in this regard. If we look at countries that have managed to get their COVID rates down very, very low, what they all share a few things in common. They treated the emergency like an emergency, and that meant spending whatever it took. It meant putting people ahead of the economy consistently. It meant, doing what was necessary in terms of mobilizing national resources and, building their own ventilators, making their own PPP. This is the kind of things that the United States did during World War II. And here I have to give props to my brother who wrote a great book about this. I'm sort of quoting him on a lot of this. About how you know a government is serious is when they're willing to spend whatever it takes, when they're willing to create the institutions that are needed to meet the crisis. There are other measures as well, but we need to expect that kind of emergency action from our governments.
Great. Okay, so we'll start off with this. Naomi, allow you to ask your question first to Tokata. Go ahead, Naomi, whenever you're ready.
Okay. So my question, Tokata, and it's always such a joy to talk with you.
Yes,
we seem to be making a habit of this. So you are. You're 17, right?
Yes,
your generation is facing a real joblessness crisis in the midst of the COVID crisis and the climate crisis. And one of the things that gets talked about a lot in terms of multitasking, solving multiple problems at once, harkens back to the Great Depression, the 1930s, when FDR created the Civilian Conservation Corps, which hired 2 million young men. There were very few women. There was one little camp, but the rest of it was men. 2 million men to go plant more than 2 billion trees and create hundreds of state parks. And My question to you is, if there was a modern day climate conservation corps, and this is something that the Biden administration talked about, what would it mean to try to repair some of the damage done to the natural world, to recognize that trees, for instance, and prairies are sources of carbon sequestration without repeating patterns of colonial dispossession and land theft? Another way of putting it is, how should Indigenous knowledge and Indigenous youth lead a program like that?
Yeah, I mean, land back, as you know, Naomi. Yes, I'm very happy to see you again. It's always nice to talk to you. And thank you for your question. It's a very, very good one. And I've been thinking about this a lot because I've actually just established sort of like a small youth council. It's just young Lakota, Oglala Lakota women right now. And we're based in Pine Ridge, South Dakota, which is where I'm currently living. But I've been thinking about like, how is it really going to look like, right? What does it take? Like, what are the actual things that we're going to have to like physically do, right, to acknowledge the earth and to sort of, I guess, to sort of mend the wounds that we've created. And I think it'll have to be based in land back, and it'll have to be based in sort of the reclamation of these sacred sites and of Indigenous lands as almost sanctuaries and models of what the change can be. And I think that reservations and Indigenous communities specifically have been living in such a way and are existing in such a way that they can be places to sort of experiment, because we are small but we're also really interconnected, and there's a lot of familial ties throughout the community that keep us all very much intertwined, and that's a large part of, you know, our cultural values. But it would have to be rooted in Indigenous knowledges of the land, and a lot of that is tied to our actual ceremonies, like what crops and different things are growing, and it depends on the biodiversity of the earth, right? It depends on which plants are growing, and defines what the ceremonial calendar is annually, so that we know what we're doing, and at the same time we are physically connecting to the earth. And it's a very much personal thing, and it's a thing that makes you realize, right, that we are completely inseparate from this being. Like if she's not there, and if she doesn't exist in the way that she does, neither do we. But yeah, and it would be a lot of reintroducing Indigenous plant species, and it would be a lot of introducing Indigenous animals to specific areas, and really concentrating and making sure that our policy and whatever, you know, sort of governing bodies that we're setting up are set up in such a way that, right, they are not defined so much by borders, but they're defined by land and where things are growing, and the way that it's supposed to be natural systems of separation, right, that have already pre-existed any of our arguments or thoughts. So
That's so exciting.
Okay.
And it's so important, you know, because like the original CCC introduced, you know, all these tree species that were not indigenous to the land. It was basically tree forests. It wasn't really the kind of land rehabilitation that we need. Thanks for that answer. Let's work on it offline.
So we have a couple of minutes left, Tokata. I know your mind has a lot of great questions for Naomi. So definitely think of one good question from Naomi, and then we'll get into the Q&A from the actual audience here. I got a list of questions for you guys also from the audience, but go ahead, Tokata.
right, I guess my question for you would be, what do you think right now, like if you could define what, I guess, the job of an ally is at this period, now whether this is an ally, right, of non-native peoples, but of peoples who are just oppressed in general, what do you think that people of privilege, and who have the space and who have the time, what do you think that their job is right now to be either, reflecting but doing in their free time to help these countries?
It's a great,
yeah
yeah. So I don't think that there's one answer for everyone, but I think there are core principles, which I think comes back to a little bit of what I was saying before we can't allow urgency to be an excuse for replicating colonial patterns of speaking for people, on behalf of people, bringing in finished plans and saying, we just need some like black and brown faces to front this thing. We know that we know how this has gone down, right? And I've seen this in my research so many times. It's happened so frequently. I've been writing about disasters for a long time, like Hurricane Katrina or Hurricane Maria, and it happens again and again in communities where you'll have like well-meaning green NGOs that will just swoop in and be like, we figured it all out for you, and sure, we want to partner with you, but we've figured it all out. And I think I don't know that much about Summit, but it seems to me that this is like a bringing together of a lot of like amazing young people who are going to go on to occupy powerful positions, right? I mean, you're all young leaders, and so I think it's super important to really think about who you're accountable to as leaders, right? Who asked you to lead them? Are you sure that they want you to lead them? Like, do you have a mandate? As somebody who gets given a platform, this is, when I was young, I was young once. I was a young leader once, and the media, messes with your head because you get treated as if you have a mandate that maybe you didn't earn, right? So you've got to be your own accountability and be like, wait a minute, nobody authorized me to speak on behalf of this community or to, and so you've got to do that work, even though it's harder. And it also means obviously sharing space. And, for me personally, it means a lot of, just not necessarily like using my platform to create space for other people instead of always just kind of mouthing off myself. But like I said, it's different for everybody. Those are just a few thoughts off the top of my head.
Yeah, no.
How does that resonate with you?
Yeah, I really want to thank you for saying that, because I think that it's definitely such, I don't know, it's such a crazy thing, right, to imagine that how prevalent, I guess, that sort of savior complex is, and the sort of work that we try to do within struggling communities and with communities struggling and trying to survive, right, within poverty and within these oppressive systems. And I really like to acknowledge, right, that like the work that we're trying to do is something that as of right now has never been done before. So, and it's something that's so, I guess, kind of like ignorant to, right, come into these communities, right, having been born and raised and privileged by these systems, right, to come into other communities then and say, this is what the solution is, right? Because we have to make sure that we are giving space for the experience and for the history and the trauma that has that does exist right now, in consequence of that. And it feels really nice to just feel acknowledged, I think, that way. Yes. Thank you very much. I think that's very much an accurate statement as to what allies can be sort of paying attention to and learning more about.
And it
Absolutely.
must be said that the folks at Standing Rock have educated many an ally in this regard.
Yes. Yes.
Definitely, yes, absolutely. Okay, so we're going to move on to our next part of our session here. As far as, me, I'm done asking the questions now. I want to hear a few questions from the audience here. And the first question that we have is for you, Naomi. You talked about the period of repair, and we know that the period will have to come with recoding with the America's Indigenous communities. I'd like to hear from each of you as to what this needs to look like. So Naomi, you want to go first?
Okay, well, mine's going to be like a little bit easy, which is I'm going to ask you to Google, or use Firefox. use a non-Google platform. Look up years of repair, and you'll find a little film that a group of us put out just in October. And it's like 9 minutes long. It's a sequel to a film that we did with Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez called Message from the Future. And so this is Years of Repair, Message from the Future 2. It's set in the future after we transform. And we did it with Opal Tometi, who's one of the founders of Black Lives Matter. We partnered with Movement for Black Lives, and different organizations that we sort of like brought out everybody's kind of most central idea, including land back, and tried to paint a picture of what it means to actually take repair seriously, repairing the land, repairing relationships. There's a Truth and Reparations Commission in our future, and there's a world where we repair our stuff instead of just throwing it away and feeding this cycle of disposability. But yeah, I was really fortunate to work on this film with my partner Avi Lewis and Molly Crabapple, the brilliant visual artist. And so check it out.
Thank you so much for that, Naomi. Here's a question for you, Tokata. How can allies better support land back movements happening across Turtle Island?
100%. Sorry, my just glitched. There's 100% very many ways to do that. I think one of the largest ways first is to look into whose land you're living on. I think that everyone is a settler unless you're right, unless all of America is immigrants, unless you are Indigenous, or peoples who have been forcibly displaced, but that's a completely different situation, and that's a completely different form of colonialism. But I think the most important thing is to recognize, that there are actual people and histories and stories of the land that you're living on, which means that the story and the feeling and experience of the land, what we're feeling and what we're seeing is not all that's there. So somebody's creation stories and somebody's entire histories and memories live in these places, and these places have defined so much about who we are, and it has defined entire identities of peoples and of nations. So find out whose land you're living on, and there's various different apps, and I would just Google one. I'm not sure of the actual name. And I would also say right now, something that I'm very much advocating for is Camp Mini Luzahan, which is something that is happening in Mini Luzahan, Otuahe, which is Rapid City, South Dakota, which is sort of a mecca, one of the meccas of Native communities because its proximity to the Black Hills. But it's now become sort of a border town because reservations and Indigenous communities within reservations rely on this city for certain essential items. And it's an entire thing, but there's a large population of homeless people. And for me, I think that homeless people, especially because a large part of them are Indigenous, which is something I think that goes unnoticed, is the population of homeless people, right? Are houseless people, but Indigenous houseless people have, I guess, a unique predicament because they've been evicted, right, from a place which is their own land, which is, right, genetically connected to them, which is their home, and they've been ousted by a people which is foreign. And so I'm supporting them right now, and I'm very much devoting my time to figuring out how I can support the struggles happening locally and in my community, and physically close to me, right? So I have proximity to support these people, and the work that's actually happening. So they do patrols along the creek where a lot of the homeless folks live, and they've been offering food and water and shelter and medical support to these people. So I would definitely check it out. A good resource for that is Indian Collective. You can check them out on Instagram. Yeah, that's something I think that you can look into, but definitely I would say keep it local. I think that's going to be the easiest thing for people to, right, individually start actively making choices within their lives and do it with the people that you love, and in the community that you're a part of, and in the homes, right, that we live in and that we've made in the places and on the land. So yes.
Great answer, Tokata. And let me reemphasize, Tokata is 16 years old. Very amazing, up-and-coming leader. I'm so excited for her and the career path that she's
17.
not just following herself, but she's opening to many other youth across the world. And one prime example is she brought Greta Thunberg to the Northern Plains tribes in this country and talked to a lot of youth, inspired a lot of youth all over the country. So very appreciative for that. Move on to the next question. This one is for Naomi. What micro daily activities, orientation shifts, and ways of being do you feel are the most effective in being anti-capitalist?
First of all, Tokata is 17. Cody, I don't know if your correction got in there. So that's important.
Sorry about that.
So the question was about daily practices in like confronting capitalism. It's such a tricky question because I feel like there's a couple ways of seeing it. The most important thing to understand is there is nothing that we are going to do in our own personal daily practices that is going to dismantle capitalism or dent it in any way. And I think we sometimes turn massive collective issues into like individual lifestyle expressions or performances. And even though it might seem empowering in the short term to say like, you can change the world with this small act, it's ultimately disempowering because it's not true. And eventually we do realize that. And then we'll be inclined to throw up our hands because we may have changed our own behavior, but it doesn't have any major impact. And so, the kinds of forces that we're talking about can only be confronted together. They can only be confronted through organizing, through social movements that are very, very strong and powerful. And so, if we're talking about confronting capitalism, we should be talking about political organizing. That said, I think it does matter that we do things in our individual life that are that are not within capitalism, so that we are able to liberate our imaginations, and because it is healthy, and because we will be happier if we decolonize parts of ourselves. And we just shouldn't mistake that for political activism. And so I think, like I said, I don't know the person asking the question, so I can't answer specifically. But I think it's important to have non-transactional relationships, to do things that you're not doing in order to get anything back, even sort of increase your follower count or something like that. Like, try to do things that are outside of capitalism for their own sake. And beyond that, I need to know you better to offer you lifestyle advice. I can just tell you what I do, which is like play with my dog and, go for walks in the forest. But like I said, I don't confuse that for activism. That's just what keeps me going. Movements keep me going too.
Thank you so much for that, Naomi. Okay, next question is going to be for all three of us as well. I think everybody, if they didn't already know, of course, Tokata was one of the, youth leaders that helped initiate the Standing Rock No Dapo movement. I myself was a tribal council member at that time for the Cannibal community, which hosted all the encampments and things like that right there in my home community. And of course, Naomi came and wrote about it and actually got a chance to stay at my house for a few nights and got to enjoy her time there and got to experience amazing things while she was there at the same time. But here's the question for each one of us, and I'll have Naomi go first. Oh no, I'll have Tokata go first, then Naomi, then I'll go last. But can you share a memory of one? Can you each share a memory of the experience that we had at the Standing Rock protests? Go ahead, Tokata.
Yeah, I mean, the most prominent memory that I'm having right now, it's been such, I guess, like a pillar memory for me, is the video that we made together, Naomi, and just the experience of like, I don't remember specifically like what we were happening, if we were building some sort of mural as a, a mass of people, but we had joined hands and we were sort of making a boundary around the entire camp, and sort of like as that was happening, it was announced that the easement was denied. And then shortly afterward, I think Ezra introduced me to you, and you interviewed me. Like Saul introduced us, and no, that guy is a wizard. Anyway, yes, but we made this video, and it was very much an emotional and raw experience of me realizing what it meant that the project had been denied, and of very dramatic to look at when the pipeline project was, put through with the Trump administration. But it's been such, I guess, also an experience to see me grow from that person and that time, and also see what this movement has grown into, and how much more I think that I've come to realize that statement is true, right? That like every time we are in conversation about these projects, and we are in conversation about these industries and these systems, right? We are in conversation about matters of our future, and I'd really like to thank you for that memory.
Oh, thank you. I feel like we should be adding video links to this conversation, because people should check it out. It's so cute. Yes, Tokata, we had just met moments before, and it was such an honor to be able to be with you in that moment. And to be able to capture it and share it with people who wanted to be at Standing Rock and weren't, and for people who don't know what we're referring to, it's a very short video where I just turned my phone camera on Tokata and said, "We just got the news. How do you feel?" And she said, "I feel like I got my future back," and started to cry. And I think you were only 13, and
Yeah.
I'm really glad you still feel good about it, because it did go viral and millions of people saw it, and it's hard, I think, to be that young and have like a certain phase of I don't even put pictures of my son on like I don't put, like, I have an 8-year-old, and I don't put his image on the internet, because it's like, I think by the time he's 13, okay, but you don't know who you're going to be in the future. Now, as it turns out, look at who you are.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
you could have ended up being like an oil executive and be really embarrassed by that video of yourself.
Very bad. I often think about that. I think about, like, if my parents had never moved me back to the reservation, like, it would be scary to think about who I would be, like, growing up in North Carolina in a mostly white community. I would be different. So we're very thankful for the way that things have played out. Yes.
Thank you guys for those amazing memories.
For my memory, I'm just going to hand over to you, Cody. Tokata, that's my strongest memory too. But I must say, I do have a bit of a memory of an almost surreal sleepover party at your house, Cody, with like various superheroes, and like, it's just, I'm gonna leave that. I'll pass that to you to explain, because it's your living room. I was just a visitor.
Yeah, it was such an amazing night, amazing time. That night when President Obama overturned the easement of the crossing of the Missouri River, Oahe is what we call it. And it was just an amazing occurrence. I mean, we had over 3,000 veterans come and stand with our people. And at that time, it was just amazing to see all the veterans from around the world that has gathered to support us during that time. And it was just an amazing feeling. But to have you there, Naomi, to have some of my greatest friends around the world be there all at the same time, for some reason, it was just like the stars aligned, not only for me as a family, but for my community of Cannonball and my tribe of Standing Rock. It was just so blessed to be able to have so much support around the world for something so precious of clean drinking water, protecting our natural resources, and looking out for the voiceless of our animals, because our animals are not able to speak to us. So who's going to speak for the animals, And we have a lot of people that live that way of life and protect and preserve those ways of life and traditional customs and things like that. But definitely, it was just an amazing night. We got to see, Shailene Woodley was there. My sister Shailene was just an awesome supporter of this whole event since day one. Of course, Tokata mentioned Ezra Miller. Of course, you, Naomi, some of my closest friends I call, my Honka brothers. We had a ceremony to become brothers. Just amazing night, amazing thing that happened there that day. And the next day, I believe it was my son's birthday party. I think he turned, I think it was about 8 or something like that. And we had you, I don't know if you remember that, Naomi, but we had you out there in the blizzard. We were actually pulling people on sleds with our four-wheelers, and it was just so cold and you couldn't see out, but such an amazing time we had together. And just those short few days just kind of brings me to the point of, just looking at the future and what needs to happen. You look at this current administration of the Trump administration wanting to build up these barriers and these walls and different types of things. But the way I look at it is we have to knock down those barriers and knock down our walls and have more dialogue. It's okay to agree to disagree out there in the world. And I think that's something people really got to take into heart, is that, we had 350 plus tribes come from all over the country. We had indigenous groups come from all over the world. It didn't color what color you were, if you're white, black, yellow, brown, it didn't matter. We were all there celebrating with one another. We're all there sharing our stories, being open with one another. And I think that was the most beautiful part of the whole Standing Rock movement, is that it showed that, for common things like water, land, environment, air, things that we need to protect our future, I think that's the most common thing that people around the world need to understand and realize, that we need to come together in this time to be able to preserve that for our future generations. You don't have to be Indigenous to be able to believe in these ways. It's just common sense to know that this is something that needs to be done, and it needs to be done in a hurry. And that's why I started my own organization, Indigenized Energy, after the No Dampo movement. You know, North Dakota, where I reside, Standing Rock resides in 2 states, North Dakota, South Dakota. North Dakota is the largest oil producing state, right behind Texas in the country. Texas is number 1, North Dakota is number 2. 70% of North Dakota is powered by coal yet to this day. So, you know, it just took us a couple years to develop one of the largest solar farms in the state of North Dakota, 3 miles away from the pipeline crossing of No Dampo. And what's so significant about that is that in our area, we don't see a whole lot of renewable energy projects. All the policy is driven by fossil fuels. Of course, our states love that oil tax money, right? So we have to be creative in ways on how to work around policies, how to be creative, and how to be trailblazers out there in the parts of the world where we come from. How can we blaze that trail so other people can join in and say, hey, this is possible. Hey, it can be done. You know, me coming from a community of Cannonball, which is the highest poverty community in the state of North Dakota, we are top 10 poorest county in the country. And if we can build something like that there, we can build it anywhere. And just by building something like that definitely empowers the next generation to really, really want to get more involved, really, really want to step forward and say, hey, what can I do to protect our future generations to come? And I think that's the most important part moving forward, and why it's so important that we come together regardless of our politics, regardless of our beliefs, religion. Now is the time to be able to do that and come together. And I think you witnessed that, Naomi. Tokata witnessed that from leading that movement. And it's just an amazing time that we're living in now. And I think it's a time of change, and I truly believe it's coming. But now we move on to the next part of our session. But before we do that, can we take 30 seconds of each one of you to do some closing comments? Each one of you, take 30 seconds. Go ahead, Tokata, you go first.
Closing comments. I think that I would just close by saying that right, I think that the thing about it is that everything that seems completely impossible, right? We've seen that realities can change very swiftly. And I think that, right, to ignore, I guess, the severity of what events occurred, right, to create the state of reality that we're living in now, and to recognize, right, that it's going to take something equally as immense and as powerful in the opposite direction, right? So we are building something that is so that has to be, and that depends so entirely intersectional, something that weaves, right, this experience that we're having as something that is unified, so that we can recognize and work together again as a global community, so that we can make sure, right, that every person sharing this living space, and we almost have to recognize each other as roommates. Like, we are sharing this planet, we're literally sharing this one piece of interconnected land, and we need to figure out, to the best of our abilities, how we are going to respect the people living with us, and the beings living with us, which means that we have to start thinking for the things that don't speak the same language as us, and the humans, you know, who are not in our circles and within our own communities, and the peoples that we've put within our own circles, right? Recognizing that there are experiences that are happening which are outside of our perspective, and it is our job to make sure that we hold ourselves accountable people to recognizing those human experiences and recognizing that there is real work that needs to be done, and we need to figure out, right, it's up to us to figure out what our part is to play in that.
Absolutely. Okay, we got about 1 minute. Naomi, go ahead. Closing remarks.
So I think people should remember that the terrible images that we saw from Standing Rock of the dogs attacking land water protectors, of the tanks, of all that violence, that wasn't during Trump. That was during Obama and Biden. Now, it was also during Obama and Biden in the final days of their administration. Trump had already been elected, where the easement was denied. But I think that what that shows is that we can't relax just because Trump's out. What Standing Rock showed, as Tokata just said, is the scale of the resistance that will be required to win. I'm really struck by the fact that even though we now have an administration coming to Washington that looks very much like one we had before, that was far from perfect, the movements are not the same. Cody, that night that the easement was denied, I interviewed you and I quoted you in The Nation saying, now we bring renewable energy to Standing Rock, because it was never just about a pipeline. We had to stop that. But what this is really about is another way of living. And so you haven't spent the Trump years just resisting. You have been building the alternative, right? And Tokata, you haven't spent the Trump years just resisting. You have been deepening your analysis in every way and being part of a youth climate movement that has had millions of people in the streets and walking out of schools and revolutionizing the way we think about the emergency that we're in. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez was an activist who went to Standing Rock, who was entirely unknown, and what she saw there inspired her to go to Washington, and now the squad is growing. So, we I guess I just am struck by the fact that we need catalytic change, and we can't just go back to the way things were. And I don't think we will. I think just in conversation with both of you and thinking what Standing Rock spawned and inspired in all the ways that are impossible to measure, we just don't know what's coming. We don't know, but all we know is we're going to have a big fight ahead of us.
Absolutely. And once again, thank you guys so much, Naomi and Tokata. What an amazing event. And thank the Summit team once again for putting this all together. And thank you so much for the great conversation. Everybody have a good evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Wow. I am always in awe of the incredible leaders within this community who show up so fully, who point us toward the bright possibilities for a better future, and to remind us of our own responsibility to take action to get there. Cody, Tokata, and Naomi left us with a beautiful prompt for further conversation. So if you're participating in our full event platform, I invite you to check out the tabletops for further discussion. Also, I want to remind you that our Story Slam with our amazing MC, Michelle Antoinette, is coming up very soon. And lastly, for everyone else tuning in, I want to say thank you for joining us. It's such an honor to get to host these conversations, and we hope to see you again soon. Thank you.